A couple of weeks ago, I sat down with the movie stars Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe and the director Ridley Scott and the producer Brian Grazer for a conversation about the movie. Here is that conversation.
But take me through the process here because I want to get everybody involved.
All right, well, basically...
I mean, you're the guy who saved the movie.
But basically what had happened is I bought the story, eventually was able to get a great screenwriter, Steve Zalian, to write this script. The screenwriter, fortunately, had worked with Ridley Scott prior to that on two different films, Black Hawk Down and Hannibal. I ended up getting a script 18 months later, and we began a pre-production on this film. I did it was starting with Denzel.
It's now about 2004.
It's about 2004, and the cost of the film became somewhat out of control. And probably about 6 weeks prior to filming the film, you know, with everything all set and ready to go, the Universal decided that they weren't going to make it. So I think we were collectively disappointed.
And you wouldn't let it go?
Well, I didn't want to. Yeah, I didn't let it go. It was emblazoned in my mind. I just felt like I should, you know, stick with it. The two characters were very interesting. The theme was powerful. It's a movie about the pervasive nature of crime in our country, and takes place between '68 and '73. And I'd always wanted to do this film actually with Ridley Scott, and from the very beginning. And he just was never available. And I'd talk to him at a party and I'd say, what do you think? And he'd say, great story, but I'm not available. And so here was an opportunity now, after the movie had crashed, to revisit it with Ridley. And he said, you know, I think I can make it work. My schedule has changed. I called Denzel and he said, Ridley Scott, absolutely. And then what was wonderful is that Ridley had this tremendous, this successful relationship with Russell, had made several films with him, including Gladiator, and then within 48 hours we were moving forward.
Tell me about this character, Frank Lucas, and why did you want to play him?
They're two very fascinating men who came together. It's just an interesting story, you know. As Brian said, when Ridley came aboard, everything changed. Early on, I actually wasn't that interested in doing the film, and then Antoine Fuqua came to me, and I said, "Well, I'll do it with you," and then that all fell apart, and so and to his credit, Brian never gave up. I'm really happy for him, and he's obviously, this is why he's where he's at, because he knows when he has something good and he doesn't let it go. So when he came back to me and said that Ridley Scott wants to direct it, I was like, okay, Yeah. So that really got the ball started again in my court. I answered one of those five?
Yeah. Tell me, what movie did you see?
I read the script. The script stayed with me. I read the script actually way back, you sent it to me 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was about to engage in another film, and Steve, it came from me because I knew Brian socially, wasn't going to ever work with him as far as I'm concerned, because he's got a company, I've got a company. But it's always about the material finally. And when he said, look, Zalian's written this piece, I got boing, because Zalian to me is one of the best writers in the business. I read the script. It was lengthy. It was like 170 pages. And out of that, I gave you what I felt about it, which was all great, positive. Said I'm off. So 2 films later, and I'm sitting in Provence, I think it was with Russell. He's going into deep thought. Okay, right?
Yeah. You've been to Provence.
And I'm saying, did you ever
be there at this moment as we speak?
He was there. Did you ever read this script, this material? He said, yes, I did. And one way or another, I said, I think this is we got this conversation about this Richie character being very interesting. Yeah. And off that, I said to Brian, what happened? And with that engagement of what happened, I said, do you think Denzel will come back in? And Denzel, I don't know what you said. What did you say? Yeah. He's always said yes, because here we are. Yeah. So it's all about the material. For me, that was a script that was not apologetic about two very definitive characters who were both diametrically opposite each other in their paradoxical conditions. In other words, one had a immaculate business and private life, and yet he did what he did for a living, which is the Frank Lucas character. Right. On the other hand, the other person was absolutely impeccable in terms of being a cop who was immovably honest, and in fact had become notorious because he'd actually found on a stakeout $1 million in the back of a car, handed it in, which made him now a leper to his colleagues in the police department when he should have distributed the wealth.
They've never seen something like that happen.
No, but also police are underpaid, so they tend to be wide open to corruption, logically, right? On the other hand, the Richie Roberts character, his private life was, let's say, at least best described as immature, right?
In his personal life.
So these two characters wouldn't meet till 15 minutes from the end, which is, when you say that to a studio executive and he says, isn't that a problem? And I always go, no, it's not a problem. But do I think it's a problem? Absolutely, it's a problem. But you take that eccentricity in the screenplay as saying this may be the life form of the project will come together, and that's what you're going to be waiting for these guys to actually meet, which is what happens. So that's why it works. Those dynamics, I think, work pretty well, don't you?
The broader story of how this comes together, even though at the core of it you've got material, right? Also in that core is stories of friendships and loyalties and tenacity, because that's why this group is together. We're all connected, in multiple layers, Yes, we are attracted to the core material as a paramount, but we're also attracted to working with each other because of those loyalties and friendships.
In fact, you just finished another movie with Ridley.
Yeah, well, mate, he's the governor, He knows how to make a film, and I prefer to be on a set with guys who know how to make a film. Call me silly.
What was it about the character, though, beyond working with friends and people you respected, that you liked about this guy, Richie Roberts?
Well, to be totally honest, there was nothing on the page about Richie Roberts that I was intrigued with at all. What I was intrigued with was what was missing. What I felt was missing. Because I was thinking, because Frank Lucas is a cinematic character coming straight out of the gate, and that was what Brian's instinct was burning about, this guy should be a film, So my thing was like, if you've got a cat this big, how do you go into the jungle and catch this guy? What do you do? What do you gather? What's the weight of the evidence you need to bring down a guy with this much money, this much influence, and this many friends? That to me was intriguing.
And people in the police department are not necessarily helping you.
No, they're not going to help you because, as we say in the movie at one point in time, he's the cash cow.
Yeah.
He's bringing a lot of people, great holidays and boats in the driveway,
So how do you work that out? I mean, for you as the actor, the idea, you got to catch the biggest cat in the jungle, and even people on your own team are against you.
Well, luckily you can go to the source in this particular instance, and you can sit down and talk with Richie, and you begin the long process of talking to him and say, what did you do? What was there in front of you, And the thing about Richie, he's a reticent sort of fella, He didn't answer any of my questions, I don't think, in the first time we sat down to talk, which actually was intriguing, and that made it more interesting, so I wanted to talk to him again.
Didn't answer them, or?
Not necessarily, no. No, and it's not that he's trying to avoid anything, It's just that he's not the sort of guy to walk into a room and vomit his life onto a table.
Are you surprised at all now that Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts are friends, and Richie Roberts, now a defense attorney, represents Frank Lucas?
I'm not surprised. If you think about, and this is obviously a question I asked Richie a number of different ways, and the core thing is they spent 9 months together, playing on the same team, putting forward cases against corrupt police. So that's a gigantic bonding experience for the two of them. It's like, they won multiple championships together. They played it really hard and they played the game well, and they're always going to be connected by that bond.
What reservations did you have about a character who's kind of an anti-hero, a character who your director wants to be sympathetic, a character who kills people, a character who's responsible for lots of kids dying?
I didn't have any reservations about any of those things, actually. Things develop in the media, and they start in one place and they end up. That's what I feel. I didn't have any reservations about the character. I just initially just wasn't a story I wanted to be involved with, quite simply. What changed, and similar to what Russell said, is the filmmaker. The two times that I agreed to do the film had to do with the filmmaker. When one filmmaker left, I was off the project until Ridley came on board, and Brian called me, and I said, oh, I'm interested in working with Ridley. As much as I was interested in playing the character wasn't enough of a reason for me to want to do the film.
What is the movie about for you?
Ridley sort of carved it out already, which was what was interesting, that this one man who was in this awful business really had his home life together and lived by a certain standard. Yet this other guy whose home life or personal life was in shambles, if you will, was so honest in his professional life. I thought that those dynamics, those two characters and how they come together, I thought that was very, very interesting.
You had conversations with Frank Lucas about Frank Lucas. What'd you learn? What was interesting about it?
You know, I was actually surprised at how fragile he was at times. You know, he shed a lot of tears with me about his past, about his life, about his you know, at the same time, he's the type of individual, he comes in the room very humble, Mr. Washington, this, that, and within 2 hours, he's running everything. You know, he's like a finger he just leans on you, you know, and he just, over days and weeks, you know, and you look up and, man, he's got a little bit more. He's got another little piece of you, you know, and just a little bit more, but always nice and always sweet. And you look at this man, you go, wow, this guy has this broken body, and he's 70-some-odd years old, and he's sitting in a wheelchair. But there's 20 guys around him that are listening to him and running and going and getting stuff for him. You know, he's a dynamic personality, you know, he's powerful. And I really do believe, and it's his story, and it's the way he's got to tell it, because I think it helps him to feel good, to say that if he had gotten an education, if he had gotten on another track, he might have been
running a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, he did anyway. It's not much different than the way some of them will run anyway, you know.
So, is there part of his story you couldn't tell? For example, a couple of things. One is that the incident that sort of propelled him when he saw his cousin's brains blown off by the KKK.
Well, it's something, yeah.
And B, the story of when he meets Bumpy Johnson in a pool room.
Yeah. When he was a youngster, he was a good pool player. He used to play for money, and I think Bumpy witnessed this talented pool player. He was about 18 years old, and actually was intrigued by the kid, engaged in conversation with him, and said, fundamentally employed him, and said, why don't you come work for me? And basically groomed him. And as in the line, a good logical line in the script to jump to us, you know, it's a surface line, but it actually says a lot, is a guy who, Richie Roberts says it, he says, who best to teach than the person who's actually closest to you every day, in this instance would be the driver of his car, is actually probably imparting wisdom little by little, bit by bit, without even being aware of it or conscious of the fact he's actually necessarily educating him. Because I think, with what I saw, the way Bumpy was very much the overlord and master of this guy who would drive the car and open the door for him, but this guy was taking it all in. So when Bumpy prematurely died, Frank was already kind of locked and loaded. In fact, Frank already had several businesses going, didn't he? Which Bumpy encouraged. Bumpy didn't mind it. In fact, he had other means of employment. Probably gave him a sense of security that his driver also did other things.
Why was he so savvy about business, other than just a bright guy? He brought his family up so he would have a secure
because he trusted
operation.
them. He trusted them. You know, he didn't trust people. And he trusted his family, and he was raised a certain way, and he believed that they'd be loyal to him, and he knew that they would follow him. He always said, you know, if I become, like Ruby Dee says in the film, he said that, you know, if I became a doctor, they would have become doctors. They would follow me wherever I go. You know, they were a tight unit.
He supposedly said somewhere, people just like me. Frank Lucas.
Okay.
Yeah.
They had no choice.
It was true with Bumpy too.
Yeah. But there's a simplification of that. Some people can say, so I'm going to buy a passport. How much is the passport? $20. your name or somebody else's? Well, it's my name.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fly into Laos. I'm gonna find a guy. I'm gonna hire some donkeys. I'm gonna ride around the mountain to this geezer over here in the mountain here, who's the Chinese warlord that I've checked out, will sell me retail. I'll have pure heroin, cheap. I will
It's just
bring
smart business.
It's
cheaper
not,
product
it's so, no,
of
it's
good
not
quality.
only smart. It's very simple. It's very simplistic thinking. Anyone who's smarter than that, I think, wouldn't have done that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
Richie would have gotten him somehow in the end, wouldn't he? Even if he had not seen him that night at that prize fight.
Yeah, and I could never actually zero in on that being a factual thing.
Yeah.
When the more guys I talked to, the more groups of officers had seen him on that same night. So it wasn't just a singular piece of information to Richie on that particular evening. But, you know, in discussion with Richie, the only way that this type of criminal investigation is solved is luck.
Yeah.
You know?
And
you
the
can have
luck
all
here is
these
a fight or
guys.
something else, just
Yeah, you have all these guys, you
little
know,
facts.
and what their job is, and that type of surveillance that they're doing is they're staring at a blank wall, hoping to see a crack, you know. And the more guys that stare at the wall, the more chance you've got of finding that crack.
Yeah. Frank said, convinced it was the coat, and we thought, well, there's enough flashily dressed people on the night of that fight. It can't have been the coat. There were lots of chinchilla coats in the room, and I reckon it was the position in the seat where the guy's sitting there
to the ring.
Yeah. But would he have gone without his wife wanting him to go?
Well, here's the story, the way Frank told it to me. It didn't have anything to do with the coat. He bought the coat. His wife didn't give him the coat. This is the version he told me. He bought the coat because he knew other gangsters were coming and he wanted to make sure New York was represented well. There was another drug dealer named Frank Matthews, who the feds were actually tailing. He and Frank Matthews started betting. He said Denzel was nothing but ego. We saw Frank Sinatra and Miles Davis and all this, and we thought we were stars too. So Frank Matthews says, I got 100,000 on Joe Frazier. He says, I got 2 on Ali. He says, I got 350 on that. He says, I got 4 on him. And they got up to $400,000 or $500,000. So the feds were like, well, who's this guy in this chinchilla coat that can bet $500,000 with Frank Matthews? And they were like, I don't know, he's a pimp, he's I don't know. And that could sit in row 2A, whatever.
Yeah, but what amazes me is nobody knew that beforehand except within the Harlem community.
Because he was so, not even in the Harlem community, he was so far removed from the street. He had a layer of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 people. You sold the dope and you gave your money to that guy who gave the money to that guy. He came back, gave it to him, who gave it to him. He brought it over to him. He came around, gave it to him, and he left it there. That guy went and gave it back to Frank's cousins.
You all wanted to work together. Do you two, as very good actors, anticipate this final climactic scene because you're going to be together in a room? This is a especially important moment that this film has been building up to. I mean, do you build up for this?
Oh yeah,
scene?
mate, it's exciting to think about that it's coming down on the track on the schedule, you know?
Really?
I mean, we worked together in 1995.
Right.
You know, we got on really well. It was very simple, basic friendship, you know, based on working together and, you know, understanding each other, you know, from that perspective. So 12 years later, to do it again, you know, given all the other things that have happened in our lives and, you know, kids and kids growing up and, you know, and all that sort of stuff, it was a really enjoyable feeling that I'm going to be back in a situation, working with Denzel, doing this type of scene and this type of story. It was just something to really look forward to.
I always say the time to worry about flying is when you're on the ground. There's no point in worrying about it when you're up in the air. It's too late.
Yes.
So trust the pilot you're going with, right? And the co-pilot or whatever the titles are. But this is a group of people that it's real easy to trust for obvious reasons. So even if we had made a bad movie, let's say, I'm sure we would have had a good experience, you know, and I know everybody would have brought 100% as they did of themselves to it. And that's a success for me. That's successful. That's successful filmmaking. You know, sometimes it works. We've all been there. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't. You know, we've all been there. So, but that's a good recipe.
When you see it happen, Brian, I mean, do you sit to yourself and say, man, I've got to find another property and try to entice these 3 people together
of course.
again?
That's within the definition of a producer. There's
So this has been such a positive experience, and the end result is so good, you're looking.
Sure, of course. I mean, I'm anticipating that I'm working with all three of them on different things.
See, reluctance, whatever the word is, I had to respect and like the fact that this guy just wouldn't let go. It's like, this guy's, he's hanging on to it, he's fighting for this thing. How can we do it, D? How can we? I'm like, well, that's not going to happen like that. All right, well, what about this? You got to respect that. You got to, okay, this is not just a job or,
And part of this is you didn't want to admit it, Theo. You'd never had a movie you were involved in be shut down.
Well, that's true, and probably this is an aberration that's even greater than that in film. I don't think it's happened to. I'm not sure it's happened to anyone, but it was really more that I just found that the story was so compelling. The characters were so interesting. They seem so different, but yet they're both fearless. They're both enormously resourceful. There's just so many things about it that was distinctive and interesting and dynamic, and sonically and visually it had such great potential. And of course with Ridley it became realized. But it's really about less about failure and more about really
believing in the project's potential.
Believing in it and the core idea of it.
I'm telling you, from guys that parked the car, I've heard more about this movie, and there's been one trailer out. That's all people knew. But this guy, I've had more people come up to me about it. Man, I can't wait, American Gangster.
I know.
Yeah.
They don't even know what it is, other than a 2-minute trailer. I think we're all good, but I don't think it's more than just that.
It has a light beyond it.
Yeah, I think they have a sense of what they're going to get, and they like it, and they want that they want to live through these men.
Live what through these men?
When people say, what do you expect people to get from the movie? I always say it depends upon what they bring to it. So maybe just some relief. Maybe just a guy, like you said, that does thumb his nose and gets it with the 1% that does,
Whose idea was to call us American Gangster?
It wasn't any of the four of ours, although we all knew.
Was that the operative title from the beginning?
No, it was True Blue, actually.
No, it was True Blue.
It was True Blue. Yeah, just. None of us liked the title. I didn't like the title True Blue, and I knew that we couldn't go with that. I think none of us liked that title, and we just scrambled around. Eventually, sort of welded it together, and it became American Gangster, which has scale, and it has scale, and it in some ways kind of defines what the movie is.
Did you go and watch French Connection and Serpico and those movies about corruption in New York City before you made this?
French Connection was one of my favorites of the Willie Friedkin movies anyway. Yeah. And French Connection, we talked about that, and we talked about how great character Popeye Doyle was at that time, right?
Mm-hmm. That shows one of the shirts specifically just to make a touch the hat to Gene. Gino.
The Hawaiian shirt.
Homage.
And we even dressed the accountant at the following first, like Gene Hackman. He had the hat on, the guy on the coast. So there he is. It's like following Gene Hackman. Yeah. That's one of the great ones that still holds together really well. I mean, and that's a film which is based very much in almost documentary reality, which it still does. And whereas The Godfather is more of a classical, almost operatic view of the mafia and the aggrandizing of the mafia into the position of great respectability, where you're sitting there watching Marlon Brando as the king and think, wait a minute, he does this and that and that, and the only thing he won't step into is heroin because he thinks it's dirty.
But it's also Marlon Brando as CEO too. Marlon Brando.
But I mean, I'm saying I love The Godfather. Don't get me wrong. I love both of them. Two of The Godfathers are wonderful films.
First two.
Yeah, the first two. But and because of that, they kind of they have staying power. So they kind of are art in the cinema. I think because when it's got staying power, it is art. Same way I think is French Connection is art. It still stands right in there and it still works. You can still watch it and think it's like it was made yesterday. So yeah, it was very much part of the. How do I combine a little bit of French Connection, because I wanted this kind of documentary-ish approach to the thing, really based off a lot of great still photographers of that particular period.
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z. He's a friend of mine. He's a friend of Denzel's, and we thought about Jay-Z a while ago, but there wasn't a lot for Jay-Z to do at the time, you know, in terms of scoring the film, because a lot of it is source. Jay-Z saw the movie, loved the movie, and the next day he called and said, I want to do an inspired by album that's independent of our movie, but in some ways has some compatibility to it because his songs will parallel the story of our movie. So he, in 5 weeks, wrote, recorded, produced 15 songs. And his album will come out, I think, 3 days after our movie is out, November 2nd. And I heard 7 tracks, thought they were really strong, and it's just a benefit. We're lucky, happy that he saw it and it inspired him.
Do you sense that they're beyond what you've just said? There's a buzz about this movie that's different, maybe even from the last movie you made or other movies. Somehow this has, because of American Gangster, because of whatever.
It seems to be, you know,
music,
characters. I can't say the one thing, but on a grassroots level, it just seems to be young people, or not even just young people. You know, I live in Los Angeles, so you actually don't run into anybody there. You know, you drive, and so actually the only time I see people in the gym. People are asking me this in the gym. A lot of Latin kids in the gym, Mexican kids or whatever. You know, people parking the car, this one, that. Just people on the street who just been talking about. You know, I can't wait. I saw the trailer. I can't wait. And I think they put together a brilliant trailer. So,
what do you do during the making of the movie?
Watch Ridley.
You know, I'll work before that, but really producers don't have to do very much when the movie's being shot. I mean, sometimes more than others, but in this case, I mean, Ridley is really a master filmmaker. He's in charge of a visual world, a sonic world, and those things are very important in this film. And what he does especially well, better than all filmmakers, is create an environment, a world that you're transported to, that you can't escape.
What part of it do you like best, directing? The editing room, on the scene?
All of it. Yeah. All of it. I think it's like the idea of retirement's out of the question, because I really feel alive when I'm doing it. Don't you feel alive when you're doing it?
Absolutely.
I feel alive when I'm doing it, because every minute of every hour of every day is never repeated, and there's always a problem.
Thank you for doing this. Cheers, man. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Great to see you again. Good to see you again, Charlie.
Thanks for having us, Charlie.
Thank you.
You were wonderful. Mr.
Visually and sonically. Run with that.
Run with it.
American Gangster opens November 2nd.
On Monday, join us with comedian Jerry Seinfeld, the producer and the star of B-Movie.